Welcome to the Coast to Coast podcast, brought to you by Play Picks and the Lines, coming to you from the West Coast. Josh Lander, joined as always by my guy on the East Coast, Nate Weitzer. And the East Coast is what we're going to be talking about here in just a minute. Nets and Bucks tip off this 21-22 NBA season. But as always, if you do still need a FanDuel or DraftKings account, head to fdpicks.com or dkpicks.com. Find those listings in your area, such as Game 1 of the NBA season. Nate, let's get into it.
The East Coast of Lake Superior, I presume, out in Milwaukee. The Bucks will be getting their rings at the opening night ceremony, of course, but they are underdogs, plus 1.5. The line opened at just plus 1, but the public leaning a little bit towards Brooklyn with all that star power, of course, even without Kyrie Irving. And the totals, we've seen a lot of movement as well, right? It opened at 240, now down to 237.5. And that's probably the place to start, in my opinion. 240 is a huge number. These teams obviously can fill it up, but we're talking about an opening night game. We're talking about a Eastern Conference. It was a semifinals, but it might as well have been the NBA Finals last year. Rematch, a very tense rivalry that's kind of building. Two teams that are becoming increasingly familiar with each other and increasingly savvy at defending each other, especially when we talk about how to limit Giannis to a degree. The Nets did a great job of that in the playoffs. So I think the first thing that stands out is the line movement, 2.5 full points on the under, and I still think that's not enough. I think you can bet that, or maybe talk about buying a couple points, get it back closer to where it was, teasing it. Lots of opportunities there to just hope for a lower scoring game than the hype might indicate.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of bettors were well aware that there was NBA basketball on Tuesday night to kick things off. There was a lot of movement, as you said, especially on that total. I can go ahead and brag about being someone who got it at about 239.5 when I was looking at, specifically for this podcast. But, at down to 237.5, I would feel great about getting it back up to about 241.5, maybe buy about 4 points, maybe tease it. Even with, in my opinion, taking Milwaukee in a tease is what I'm feeling, just because they are the dog there. You already get 1.5 points, add 4 more to that. I really like them at plus 5.5, as I do think this will be a really close game both ways. I think, the narrative of sort of who has more motivation to win would obviously be on the part of the Nets, having lost in the playoffs, and they'll be front row seats for the ring ceremony that will be coming down in Milwaukee. So, that fuels some fire for sure. You've got a healthy James Harden, you've got a healthy KD, and a good bevy of really veteran, pickups this season, specifically Patty Mills, Paul Millsap, and then you've also got LaMarcus Aldridge coming back to the team after only playing a few games for them last season. So I think they're short up, but they're a different unit than if Kyrie were there, taking up a lot more minutes, playing around 30 or so, and his minutes are going to go to someone who's not as good on offense, right, and who will probably be someone who will contribute to slowing down the game a bit more. I do think Jeff Green was a big loss in terms of the flow of this offense and how fast of a pace that they can play at. We saw them play these two teams match up last season 3 times in the regular season, which is where I would look in terms of pace of play. I would look much more to the regular season, obviously, than the playoffs. Is a different game once you get there. But in those 3 regular season matchups, the pace was about 104 for all 3 of those games. But like I said, I do think that the subtraction of Kyrie and specifically also Jeff Green and the addition of some slower bodies for Brooklyn is going to lead to less points. It's the first game of the season. Who knows how well people are seeing the basket in the first game like this. And an interesting stat that I was able to procure, shouting out sports data query here. The under is 18-7 in the first couple months of the season when you have 2 playoff teams coming back at each other. Maybe some tentativeness there. Everyone knows, there's a little bit of tightness when they're just like, you really want to beat these guys. And the last time you saw them wasn't a really big moment. So, I think the under is the play. And honestly, I'm a fan of the tease and looking to get this, getting 4 points, making it Milwaukee plus 5.5, and then under 241.5. I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, and the more I hear you talk about it, I do think that the Nets are probably the better play on the point spread, which is basically negligible at this point. But yeah, you're maybe I have blinders on to a degree when I think about Mike Budenholzer and the job he does with those Bucks, but it's just nothing fancy. It's just Giannis going downhill into double, triple teams. They still don't have Dante DiVincenzo, who's a really key part of their team. I think that odds makers are looking at their ability to really pull it out of their hat, coming back to beat those Nets because they were just hobbling around. And the role players, to your point, they've really shorn up the edges of their roster. The role players in that series last season were just like a complete, if they could even get carbon neutral out of them, it was great. Good job, Bruce Brown, hitting a couple floaters and like doing something. Bruce Brown, who's love him, but not necessarily the kind of guy you want complimenting a KD and Harden, a generational talent. So I do think that the Nets, with more to prove tonight, especially kind of drawing off the whole Kyrie saga and saying, we're just going to go out and take care of our business. We're still the favorites. I do think that they'll be able to win. And I think they'll do a pretty good job defensively, which we saw Blake Griffin leading the charge on that early in the series with the Bucks in the playoffs. Now they have Paul Millsap, LaMarcus Aldridge, just more bodies to throw at him, to more guys to savvy veterans, really, to just play against his strength, which is just barreling into the lane. So that's why I like taking the Bucks under 118.5, just their team total specifically. That's the way to kind of hedge against a Bucks victory, but not necessarily a shootout victory. There's a lot of different scenarios in which that bet can still hit. And again, you're looking at a playoff series in which these teams averaged 104 and 102, and the Bucks shot 30% from three. If there's any kind of that atmosphere at all, I don't think the Bucks are getting 119 points in this game.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, looking at some player props for each team as well and drilling a bit further into it, even though I think we like there to be less than 238, 239 points scored in this game, that doesn't mean you can't still take over on a number of player props based on what you like, and I harken back to the first game of last season when the Nets took on the Warriors and just wiped the floor with them, and Kyrie and KD were out there showing everyone exactly what they were capable of doing together. You've got, KD and Harden coming back together after, playing together to a degree. When Harden was playing last season against the Bucks, he was somewhat the difference maker as that was the only win that the Nets had for last season against the Bucks. I would consider definitely my favorite one, which I'm not getting great odds on DraftKings. But James Harden over 8.5 assists, I think you could see him 10, 11 assists a game, definitely early on in the season, especially. So, I think it is something that he's talked about wanting to do, which is win the assist, the assist title for a season. And he's definitely primed to do so with a bunch of people who can finish playing off of him. Specifically, probably the greatest scorer of all time in Kevin Durant. So over 30 points for KD is always going to be a decent bet, which is what his total points is at as well. You can parlay those on a few sites such as DraftKings as well. In terms of the 8.5 assists for Harden, the 30.5 points for KD. I like that. And if you do think there's going to be a good amount of misses in this game and go under, then you would consider rebounds as well, where Giannis is at 12.5. And I like all three of those for those guys in this one.
Yeah, and if you're talking Giannis rebounds, you combine that with points and assists, and it's only 46.5, which we both kind of stepped back and said that's low. Usually it's like 51 for Giannis. Yeah. Maybe because he struggled a bit to put up raw numbers in the playoffs against these guys, but in the regular season, averaged nearly 40 points per game, along with 10 rebounds and 5 assists. Getting to the free throw line like 9 times a game. And we saw what he did in the finals against the Suns. He got to the free throw line 14 times a game, shot 62% from the floor. There is going to be some sort of carryover effect. I don't mean to downgrade his game with the earlier segment talking about him barreling into the lane. He is starting to figure it out. He's added that baby jump hook, and he's going to be a very tough cover for KD or whoever the Nets try to put on him. I think that the raw stats there, and Giannis also having plenty to prove to protect what his adopted city and that ring ceremony, I think he can get over that total without necessarily getting the Bucks to 120 points as that other line is at.
Yep, 100%. And I did see some fodder on the from different outlets talking about how without PJ Tucker in a Bucks uniform, who's going to guard KD? Probably Giannis. And my inclination is no. I still don't think you put Giannis on KD as the matchup, which would lead to him, one, KD having a nicer matchup than he's ever had against the Bucks in a Nets uniform, and two, Giannis is going to have the energy that it seems maybe better line setters are saying he won't have if he is guarding KD. But I don't think that'll be the case. So that would lead to his over 46.5 total points.
Who's going to guard him?
Who's going to guard whom? Which one?
KD.
Either one of them?
No, who's going to guard KD?
Not Giannis Antetokounmpo. I mean, I'm happy to pull up the roster. I mean, specifically in the starting lineup, it's not going to obviously be someone like Bobby Portis, maybe Drew.
They start with Drew on him and just say, hey, can you make those turnaround shots
even
right
Middleton?
over him?
Yep, even Middleton. And when Middleton was guarding him heavily, alongside PJ Tucker, it actually hurt his offense. Something that I remember from Game 6 last year, where it was the Chris Middleton game, and he was not guarding KD most of the time. So there's definitely something to be said for how much energy you have on the offensive end when you're guarding Kevin Durant, right? So point Giannis there. But that's all the time that we have for this one, Nate. We are going to have another video for you guys where we're talking on that West Coast game. That one will be on the coast, Warriors-Lakers. But for now, we'll be looking forward to the opening night. Just pumped to be talking basketball with you guys. And until we see you again, happy betting.